They say that after every plane crash, air travel becomes that much safer. When an accident occurs, it is likely to expose a weakness in how air travel is operated, whether it be in the area of maintenance, pilot training, understanding the weather, or as is partly in the case of what we're going to be discussing today, airline structure. The disaster of Colgan Air Flight 3407 occurred exactly 13 years ago to the day as this video is published. It is one of the more notable fatal air disasters to occur in the last 20 years in the United States. The pilots appeared to lose control of their plane during approach into Buffalo, New York. We'll discuss the flight, how things went wrong, and what the investigation concluded were the causal factors. The date was February 12, 2009. On the ground at Newark Airport in New Jersey was a Bombardier Q400 turboprop plane. In the evening of that day, it was to perform a regional route between Newark and Buffalo, flying as Flight 3407. Colgan Air, the airline, had a franchising agreement with Continental Airlines and would perform routes for this larger US operator under the brand of Continental Connection. When the pilots of Flight 3407 turned up for work to perform the flight to Buffalo, the investigation would suspect that they were fatigued, tired after a very long day of traveling and performing pilot duties. The pilots themselves were 47-year-old Captain Marvin Renslaw and the much younger First Officer, 24-year-old Rebecca Lynn Shaw. Captain Renslaw had accumulated 3,300 flight hours, but just over 100 as the captain on the Q400. The First Officer had just 2,200 flight hours, but she did have over 700 in this plane. The accident report published by the National Transportation Safety Board notes the activities of both members of the flight crew in the preceding 72 hours. Captain Renslaw flew from Tampa to Newark 3 days before the accident on February 9th. He performed numerous flights between then and the accident flight. Captain Renslaw apparently logged on to the company's system at just after 3 in the morning on February 12th, and was noted to have been at work no later than 7:54 a.m., and he was even noted to have been sleeping in the crew room in Newark that day. Renslaw didn't even live in the Newark or New York area. As previously mentioned, he flew in from Tampa, Florida, which was where he lived, but worked on this occasion based out of Newark, so needed to make that kind of commute. As for the First Officer, Rebecca Lynn Shaw, she too was not from the New York area. In fact, she had recently moved that previous month to Seattle to be closer to family. How she ended up being based out of Newark was due to her relocating her base from Norfolk, Virginia, where she previously lived. It was apparently easier to commute to Newark. These types of extreme commutes would seem unreasonable to anyone in almost any other field of professionalism. Such commutes are in fact not uncommon at regional airlines, especially in the United States. The day before the accident, Shaw was able to travel to Newark from Seattle, passing through Memphis, Tennessee in the jump seat of a FedEx cargo plane for her commute. It should be noted that the First Officer was ill on the day of the accident. She supposedly was suffering from ear congestion and sniffles during the accident flight. Though the NTSB suggests that this illness could have affected her pilot communication, they could not determine whether this impacted her piloting performance that night. Rebecca Shaw was also not ill during her commute to Newark, and therefore likely felt pressure to turn up for work despite being ill, as to quote her own words, as was recorded on the cockpit voice recorder, "If I call in sick now, I've got to put myself in a hotel until I feel better. We'll see how it feels flying. If the pressure's just too much, I could always call in tomorrow. At least I'm in a hotel on the company's buck, but we'll see. I'm pretty tough." This was recorded in the time the plane had spent on the ground in Newark during a delay, before the flight left for Buffalo. The two pilots boarded the Bombardier plane that evening to take 45 passengers to Buffalo. Going with them were a further 2 flight attendants for a total of 49 occupants on board. Colgan Air Flight 3407 left Newark at 9:18 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and began flying northwest to Buffalo. The flight itself was delayed by some 2 hours also. The plane itself, the Bombardier Q400, is one of the most popular regional propeller planes around. Its legacy dates back to the 1980s, as it was developed from the earlier models of the Dash 8 series of planes. First taking flight in 1999, the flight deck of these planes comes with all the modern equipment one would expect of a modern passenger plane. The Q400 was the next generation of this type of aircraft, and it enjoyed a spotless safety record for 10 years. Colgan Air operated all of their Q400s under the Continental brand. The flight to Buffalo that evening was just under 1 hour. During the flight, the pilots would exhibit traits of fatigue and tiredness. The captain, for example, at 9:49 p.m., was recorded to have been yawning on the cockpit voice recorder. The majority of the flight, though, was uneventful, as the accident would occur on the approach phase of the flight. Weather that night included some light snowfall in the area. Flight 3407 was guided through the airspace at Buffalo, descending as cleared. The controllers on the Buffalo approach frequency gave the pilots an approach for ILS runway 23 at Buffalo. The flight path of this approach would take the plane over some of the suburbs of Buffalo. At 10:10 in the evening, there was a conversation between the two pilots pertaining to ice on the aircraft. The conversation was initiated by the first officer, who asked the captain if he was seeing ice on his windshield. He replied that yes, there was ice. The first officer also commented that she noted lots of ice on her windshield. This would prompt investigators to look at the possibility of this accident being ice-related. The plane's own anti-ice systems were already switched on during the cruise phase of the flight. Though the manufacturer and airline recommend different steps to be taken by pilots in incremental stages of ice severity, for example, the pilots taking control of the plane manually in more severe cases of icing, the NTSB concluded that ice accumulation did not affect the pilot's ability to control the plane. In icing conditions, pilots of the Q400 can activate a reference speed switch which will display an increased red area on the airspeed tape on the primary flight display. It is there to encourage pilots to fly faster than normal to mitigate any problems with icing. What the investigation would highlight on the Q400 was the lack of low airspeed awareness. The accident report compares the Q400 with that of other planes which include an amber region on the airspeed tape, serving as another level of airspeed warning to pilots. At 10:12 p.m., the approach controller gave Flight 3407 a new altitude of 2,300 feet. Airspeed began to drop as they were approaching the airport. The flaps were set as required and the landing gear was lowered, contributing to a lower airspeed, which dropped down to around 135 knots. A flap setting of 10 degrees was called at 10:16. And it was during this 1-minute period at 10:16 where the disaster would occur. Seconds later, as Flight 3407 was on final approach, the stick shaker stall warning activated in the cockpit. On the Q400, it also disconnects the autopilot. The stick shaker does exactly what it sounds like. It causes the plane's control wheel to shake. It's to immediately warn the pilots that they are flying dangerously slow. Such a low airspeed could put the plane in an aerodynamic stall. It was what Captain Marvin Renslow did next that became the primary causing factor in this disaster. The captain went against every piloting instinct in stall warnings and recovery and pulled back on the control wheel, pitching the nose up. As the stall reference speed had increased following the activation of the reference speed switch, the plane was actually flying some 20 knots faster than the stall speed. The action of pitching the nose up proved fatal as this drained a substantial amount of speed, putting the plane into an aerodynamic stall. This aerodynamic stall would lead to the loss of control the pilots experienced. Captain Renslow would keep the control wheel pulled back from here on out until disaster. The first officer also arguably made the problem worse by retracting the flaps. Flaps are there to give pilots greater control at slower speeds by physically increasing the size of the plane's wing to create more lift. Once they were retracted, it created a situation that would have been incredibly difficult to recover from. As the plane was going down, the aircraft began banking violently, even for a time almost flipping over onto its back. The time was exactly 10:16 and 54 seconds when Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed. All 49 occupants on board the plane were killed. The Q400 crashed into a suburban home at 6038 Long Street on the outskirts of Buffalo. The home the plane crashed into was occupied at the time. It was the home of the Walensky family. Father and husband Douglas Walensky was killed in the disaster, but the two other occupants, his wife and daughter, survived. The death toll was brought to 50. The question still remains, why didn't the pilots notice their speed was dangerously low before the stick shaker stall warning activated? For one, when investigators listened back to the cockpit voice recording, it was clear that the sterile cockpit rule was violated. The rule is supposed to prohibit any conversation that's not pertaining to the flight during critical phases such as takeoff and landing. It is believed that this also contributed to the pilots performing checklists later than normal. The checklists could have distracted the pilots from their primary flight display indicating decreasing airspeed. Perhaps one area of contention to poor pilot performance was fatigue. Colgan Air required both pilots to make substantially long commutes, as already discussed. This was also coupled with substantially low pay for pilots, meaning neither could afford to live in the Northeast where they were officially based. The airline also officially prohibited pilots from sleeping in crew rooms, but for those who couldn't afford housing or hotels in the area, the rule was frequently broken. Neither of the two accident pilots had enough sleep, and many believe that neither should have been in the cockpit of that plane that evening. Fatigue officially being listed as a contributing factor in the disaster was contested by some members of the NTSB. As one might expect, this led to a public outrage. Advocates demanded changes to rules and regulations surrounding regional airlines. Typically, regional pilots are younger and therefore less experienced, fly more frequently, are paid less, and work longer hours. The low pay disincentivized more experienced pilots from applying for those positions, and so attracted pilots who really wanted to start their career. That power from regional airlines was leveraged to the point of long commutes and fatigued pilots. Flight 3407 was just the latest in a string of incidents involving regional airlines in the United States. Regulations surrounding pilot training at regional airlines were made to be more stringent, and the Federal Aviation Administration re-evaluated fatigue on pilot performance. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video to be interesting, be sure to subscribe as there will be a new video every Saturday. I will actually be taking a week off from the 21st of February, but you shouldn't notice a difference in the upload schedule as there still will be a video that week. Anyway, it's the time of the week where I take a moment to thank my patrons over on Patreon. As mentioned last week, from the beginning of March, only new patrons will have their names read out on video. There has been a lot of support on there over the last year, and the list of names has just now become quite extensive, and I would really like to keep these outros under 2 minutes. With that said though, I should still move on to thanking my patrons for their amazing support. A thank you to the £5 tier patrons, Adventures is Stupid, Alice Lutris, Avery Tioda, Baku82, Barlavon, Chillhelm, Hunter Heilman, Hector Palmateles, Jennifer Frikedic, Joey, John Ambrosia, KTP123, Ken Zachman, Kenneth Morins, Len, Leon San Jennings, Lizzie Wizzy Let's Get Busy, Marie Ennis, MG, Michelle, Mom Left Me at Best Buy, MX Koifish, Pac-Man7, Panic Chicken, Pedro Cruz, Rebecca Rivers, Rez, Rio Wheatley, Surya Melody, Sir Wuffleton, Travis Olexa, Tristan Kriegsman, and Tyrewin. And of course, a very special thanks to the very generous £10 tier patrons, Ada Montgomery, Ann Sid, David Dabrowski, Derek Bean, Epsilon, Karma, Magaseal, Mike Milton, Roger Mayer, So FP, Steve Cottrell, Thick Coconut, Trans Rights Baby, Vapronva, and Where Are My Cheetos? Thank you all so much. And that is it from me this week. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.